Hi. Here are my questions for this week. Why can't I just buy and use a video game the way I want to? Why are video games treated as an elevated class of media compared to books, films, and albums? And is there a way to unstupid something that I think is pretty stupid about the video game status quo? My name is Sam Muskowicz, and I think about this kind of stuff a lot because I'm neurotic and I've covered the video game industry for over 25 years. I want to take this topic on this week because it's one that I haven't often tried in a world where access to the people who make and distribute video games is pretty sacred. You try not to shake that hornet's nest of people who sell games and consequently can get you early copies of the newest Zelda or Mario. But I've been looking at a new Nintendo game outside of that ecosystem, and I'm ready to talk about this. There's a fuller, awesomer, shinier level of play for one of Nintendo's newest games than what you can currently buy and enjoy as a normal person. Why is that? Let's dig in. Paper Mario: The Thousand-Year Door is a video game spin-off of the Super Mario series, originally released in 2004 on the Nintendo GameCube. Like other Paper Mario games, this turns Mario, Princess Peach, and the other Mushroom Kingdom characters into flat pieces of paper. They get into a different kind of adventure full of dialogue, jokes, and visual gags. Paper Mario games have been going for a while, and they're beloved in part because they appreciate and put a twist on the wider cultural impact that Nintendo and Mario games have had. This week, nearly 20 years later, Thousand-Year Door has been repackaged for the Nintendo Switch, and the new version lands somewhere between touch-up, remaster, remake. What does that look like 20 years later? On the Nintendo Switch, it's actually a mix. The Paper Mario concept has always been compelling on an aesthetic and technology level, and in this remake, the clever stuff often looks more clever. These paper, cardboard, and fabric effects seem more real, with tweaks to things like shadows, lighting, and reflections. There is a catch. Nintendo Switch holds some of these effects back. And I know this because I've seen what happens when people extract the game's files off of a Switch cartridge, slap them onto a high-end computer, and unlock the potential inside the game. Fuzzy details become sharper. Motion becomes smoother. This version looks more like a 20-year leap than the one that Nintendo is currently promoting. So what's going on? One of the versions of Thousand-Year Door that I'm showing in this video is labeled Yuzu. That's the name of a now discontinued app that emulates Nintendo Switch hardware on other platforms, particularly PCs and Android devices. As a refresher, emulation is nothing new. And it's generally legal in the United States, so long as the games you play are legitimately acquired one way or another. In fact, many game makers, including Nintendo, rely on emulation to provide access to older games on newer systems. This concept of translating old software to newer hardware, it's so legal that you can tap through your default iPhone or Android app store right now and download RetroArch, a gateway to emulating all kinds of classic game systems. You don't have to go down a dark digital alleyway to emulate. Nintendo would rather you think it's a dark alleyway, however. And Yuzu entered Nintendo's crosshairs earlier this year because its creators appeared to break the law in some other ways, like promoting pirated games on a Discord server. So Nintendo's lawyers pounced on this obvious liability and appeared to strike a deal with Yuzu's creators, which include them stopping work on the Yuzu app, paying a fine, and making a statement about piracy. Nintendo took that opportunity to denounce emulation and generated some scary-sounding headlines in the process. But here I am using Yuzu, and if I didn't use it, there's another emulator for Switch called Ryujinx. It does the same thing. My stance is that legally, emulators like Yuzu are as much of a piracy tool as cars are murder tools. It's drastic, but the impact is possible, but that's why we have laws and their enforcement, as opposed to cars being limited to 4 miles an hour and highways coated in bumper lanes. Nintendo might tell you that there's another issue with emulation, that the Switch is in a special category because it relies on a set of encrypted key files. Every Switch system has a unique set of keys, and games won't load without them working in tandem, doing a bit of a handshake with your cartridge or your digitally downloaded game. Nobody's gone to court yet, really, to argue whether or not this is an undue burden to put on a consumer. Is it illegal to own a Nintendo Switch cartridge and then load its games on a different system because you bypassed a consumer-specific set of keys or used someone else's keys? Imagine if you had a cassette tape and a CD in the same boombox. Hit play on the CD, hit record on the tape, swapped out a few of your CDs, made a mixtape and tried to enjoy that resulting series of songs as a personal mixtape on maybe another boombox, only to be told that since your tape deck doesn't use lasers and can't read whatever code the original CD player had, your mixtape is breaking the law. Is that Nintendo's legal argument here? That's a bigger question than I can possibly answer, but we've seen issues with companies like Sony BMG back in 2005 trying to attach software to CDs and the insane consumer uproar that followed because of the kind of damage that happened. Since Nintendo isn't going to that level, they're not necessarily facing that scrutiny. But I struggle with this higher level logic, this idea that when you pay for a piece of standalone art or media, that it isn't enough, that your $50 or even $70 of a purchase is contingent on spending more money or devoting more to one company's ecosystem. We've seen this with computer printers, where manufacturers have tried to put digital rights management on the ink cartridge system. This idea that you can't buy cheaper third-party ink cartridges that otherwise perform the exact same function if they don't do the exact right handshake with the printer. It's not our fault as consumers if a product maker has a vested interest in us sticking with its entire ecosystem, only for us to opt out in favor of a better option that's been made available by the market. What I've shown you here with Thousand Year Door running on an emulator is, in my opinion, a better option, with caveats. Thousand Year Door on an emulator requires a pretty powerful computer or phone to run at its highest settings. And it also requires obtaining those aforementioned encryption keys, which if we really want to play in Nintendo's legal garden, you can do this by jailbreaking your own Switch, meaning opening it up and extracting its files, and using community-developed tools. Reminder, American law has generally been in favor of jailbreaking a device you own for personal use. That's why iPhone and Android jailbreaks are quite common. For arguably the biggest caveat about Thousand Year Door, Switch emulation is not perfect. Sometimes Thousand Year Door via emulation will pause, stutter, or introduce small visual glitches. For a brand new game, it only came out one day before I began filming this. Nintendo has tested the heck out of its game on its own platform on the Switch, and if you'd rather have a Nintendo guaranteed gameplay experience than an experimental one, you can buy that at a store right now. I'm talking about market options. That's a good one. But the difference between Switch and Switch emulation is substantial if my back and forth comparisons in this video haven't made that clear. The 2004 GameCube game actually ran at a higher frame rate, meaning the speed of its animation, this metric that's meaningful in a medium like games, where quick reactions can determine success or failure. That rate is halved on Switch, from 60 frames per second on GameCube to 30 frames per second on Switch. Actually get back to 60 frames per second with the newer Switch version by loading it in an emulator. It has a toggle inside of a mod portion of the menus, double the fluidity. I like it better this way. I notice the difference because I'm the one in control, moving Mario and his friends around. And there are moments where tapping at just the right time is easier when the gameplay looks smoother. Thousand Year Door, along with other Paper Mario games, has a combat system where you tap at just the right time with an on-screen indicator, and if the screen is more fluid, reacting to that sort of thing is more fluid. On top of that, via emulation, you get clearer imagery. When you play on Switch, you actually get less than the full pixel resolution on normal hardware. It caps at 900p resolution, which is short of the 1080p standard. Nintendo's also surprisingly disabled anti-aliasing. You normally see this in video games because it smooths out these stair-step jagged lines when a digital image is diagonal. Nintendo games generally look clear and vibrant, even with settings like these turned off. This is actually sort of a famous Nintendo quality that they don't need to be the highest end 8K 50 gazillion pixels hardware in order to look beautiful. But I think Thousand Year Door goes a bit too far to fit into the Switch hardware's constraints. Via emulation, you can undo that. Crank up the pixel count and you'll see clearer up-close details, distant background elements, finer bits of these handcrafted paper and fabric elements, and far fewer jagged edges. Why is it that I'd even have to turn to a computer emulator to make this game look and run better? We're 20 years into this game's life, but this is all a Switch can muster? Switch is an impressive piece of portable technology. It packs a lot of cool visual power into something you can carry onto the bus and get decent battery life out of in the process. But that also makes its maximum gaming power a lot lower than other devices, not just home computers, but also portable devices. Switch was already a bit dated in 2017, and we're about 7 years out from that. Thousand Year Door's code has already been picked through by fans, And it's there that they found something curious, something beyond the limits of the Switch. Mentions of higher pixel resolution, as high as 2160p, which is otherwise known as 4K. This suggests that Nintendo plans to make the Thousand Year Door remake forward compatible with some kind of more powerful system, maybe the Switch 2, Super Switch, or whatever they're going to call the system that they will sell, that they will control. So the cartridge in your hands that you've purchased this year, 2024, has actually been crafted with more power in mind, that has artistic intent for you to see and feel more visual power. But that intent is, until further notice, gated by whenever the Switch's successor is announced and released. So this video, in large part, is asking, why is that up to Nintendo to decide? Emulation is another way of saying that there is an open technology market. Other devices can translate a game's images, gameplay, systems, and experience nearly one-to-one. If I were a higher-end product manufacturer, I'm making the best computers in the world or the best phones or any of that, that might be the message I take to US Congress in a lobbying effort. Let the market decide as far as device power and options go. Give consumers an easier time to develop and distribute emulators. Open up consumer protections so that they can take their game purchases to whatever device they please. This concept of a locked down console-specific experience can make sense when a system's features and perks are inherent to gameplay. Like when the Nintendo DS was the best touchscreen gaming option in 2005, or the Wii offered a way to use your hands and waggle in a way that no other device was really putting out there. But it didn't take long for the hardware market to catch up and sell powerful, touch-compatible, and motion-compatible devices of their own. Now, honestly, the Nintendo Switch has been surpassed pretty handily on a hardware level. Not just with big beefy home computers, but portable system manufacturers like Valve and ANEO are cranking out capable hardware that can translate Switch gameplay nearly one-to-one, or maybe even with improvements. Instead of reacting to market pressure and consumer options, though, Nintendo right now is burrowing into a comfort zone of making scary declarations about emulation and holding on to their next more powerful system whenever they see fit. Which, that's fine if Nintendo wants to do that. But you can't have your emulation is scary cake and eat your limited power at whatever time we say so, too. I doubt that lobbying that I suggest of powerful system makers going to Congress and making these statements is going to happen in the next 5 or so years, in part because NVIDIA and AMD are two of the biggest companies making powerful computer hardware, but they also happen to be working with Nintendo and Microsoft and Sony for all three of those companies' current game consoles. They're probably not about to rock the boats of their current billion-dollar deals. But I do think it's time to rethink this concept of hardware exclusivity on a larger scale, and device ownership and keys on a legal scale, as we become more a digital-first society. Every aspect of media ownership, which had been defined by pre-1970s lawmakers in the United States, has since been twisted. As but one example, your average digital purchase isn't actually for the game, the movie, or the book that you want, but for its license, something that a seller can arbitrarily revoke whenever they see fit with no required recourse for you to get a backup copy. And then when dated hardware dies, when the whole ecosystem of you've got to buy this system to play this kind of game, your related purchases shrivel up with it. We've actually seen this in recent years with Nintendo's Wii U console, which has a nasty issue with a certain battery deep in its motherboard. Where's the perfectly legally protected recourse to move purchases from Wii U to another Wii U or to a serviceable emulation device like a computer or smartphone? Nintendo doesn't have an answer to that. They were happy to hit you up in the Best Buy, Target, Walmart era of getting you the system and games, and then on the eShop when you could digitally directly pay them. But that's all kind of gone. In fact, you can't even access the Wii U eShop anymore. So one system dies, another one boots up. There's no Wii U eShop to work with there. Hence, where I stand, both for enjoying Thousand Year Door today and enjoying all of my current purchases and games in the future, emulation should not be illegal. Jailbreaking a piece of hardware that I've purchased for personal use should not be illegal. Combining both of those to take legitimate software purchases wherever I see fit and open up the artistic intent of my favorite media should not be illegal. And consumers should not have to take responsibility for a company's decision to bundle hardware and software purchases. That's their market reality and choice. But enjoying a smoother, richer, more fluid, and more flexible gaming experience on the devices I prefer is my market reality and choice. And I want to be clear, I'm not demanding that Nintendo do specific things, put out games for exactly the systems I want at the rate I want. It's about opening up our ability to take our hardware and our software into our own hands. Instead of playing the victim, we can play our own advocate. And that's generally how I feel about any sort of software and art experience. Why do I have to read a book from page 1 all the way in order? Why do I have to watch a TV series in order and have to watch the terrible second season of Friday Night Lights? Again, a larger conversation about media ownership, understanding, and appreciation today and 10, 20, 30 years in the future. So I invite you to continue with me as I explore that sort of theme in more videos. You can find me as ever at sam@samred.com or samred.com as my website, which will maybe one day host something like a subscription service or other exclusives and has links to other things I've worked on. And otherwise, talk to me soon. I'll be back next week with more banter about this kind of stuff. Take care.